So here's a quick summary of Chapter 5 of the Lean Startup, which is about testing leap of faith assumptions. Now, these are just assumptions that you make when you're building a product, when you've decided to start your own startup. It's an assumption you make about the problem you're trying to solve, whether it actually is a problem or not, and that you have assumed that it is a problem, which is why you're building a product to solve it. These are assumptions that you have to test over and over again throughout the product development process to make sure you're on the right track, or if not, whether you need to pivot. And that is because you need to make sure, for instance, that you're solving a real problem, that people identify you as the potential product to solve that problem. There are assumptions that you have to make sure are correct, or else you end up building something that nobody wants. And the way to test key assumptions is to get out of the building, as Eric Ries recommends in Chapter 5. It's to just go out there and start interacting with your customers and to observe their behaviors in real life. Now, if you can't do that, you can also build a minimum viable product and to test it maybe online, maybe post it in a forum or something, or share it with other people on these online communities and see how they react. The point is, you want to be out of your head as quickly as possible. You don't want to suffer from analysis paralysis, where you keep refining your plans over and over again. Instead, you want to be in touch with the people who will be using your product. And how you do that is you literally ask them questions, you interact with them, you see how they react to certain questions that you have about the assumptions that you have made. And just to give you an example from what I'm doing with my own startup, what I do is I like to take the approach of watching people behave. I like to ask questions and I like to see how they react. I like to build very minimal products and to launch them and then see if people decide to use them or not. And if so, to see how they use them, how engaged they are, how much time do they spend on this product? Do they come back after a week? Do they come back after a day? When exactly do they use the product? And every single answer to these questions is really answering my overall question, which has to do with my leap of faith assumption, which is really, is the assumption correct? Have I made the correct assumption? Am I solving the right problem? Can I solve the problem? Is my MVP targeting parts of the problem? If so, how? It's really just understanding whether what you've assumed to be true is in fact true. That's what you want to do when you're testing leap of faith assumptions. And the way to do that is just to observe user behavior. Another point that's made in Chapter 5 of the Lean Startup has to do with the build, measure, learn feedback process, which isn't actually just building something, then going out there and observing the behavior that you expect to see or don't expect to see and then learning from that. It's also figuring out what you want to learn first, figuring out what you want to measure, and then building, and then going from build, measure, learn. So there's also the fact that you have to be sure about what you want to learn first, which goes back to the leap of faith assumptions that you've made. The leap of faith assumptions are assumptions you've made about the problem you're trying to solve, about the people you're solving the problem for. And what you want to do is to see if what you've assumed to be true is actually true, and then you want to relate this to certain metrics that you think you're going to track to confirm whether your test is correct or not. That's what you're trying to do, essentially. You're trying to decide on what you want to learn, and then you want to know what to measure to make sure that you're on the right track. Make sure that the assumptions that you made are correct, and then you want to build a minimal viable product to go out there and test these assumptions. And then once you've built something, once you've tested it out, you want to then go back to the drawing board and add an iteration to this minimal viable product. And then just be in this constant loop of testing where you're just constantly testing assumption after assumption. And I would actually recommend that you not go with a very formulaic approach. Once you start testing your product with people, you'll start getting the hang of it. People will use stuff people won't use stuff. If people don't use your stuff, or they just abandon your stuff, then you know your product doesn't work. It's honestly not that complicated. You build something based on what you've seen, how you've seen people act in response to a problem that they have, and then you see if they use the product or not. That's really it. So that's it for chapter 5 of the Lean Startup, and I will see you in the chapter 6 summary.